I'm going to talk a little bit about the overview of the market in South America, just to compare how Brazil compares with other countries in the region, so you can have a graphic overview of that, and talk a little bit about Brazil supply demand update, and talk a little bit how the business is evolving, particularly because in Brazil we have a new gas law that is liberalizing the gas market, and since the new gas law has been enacted, it's been a very fast movement in terms of new players and new projects, as you're going to see very soon. So if you see the gas imports in Central and South America, I put CSA. If you look at the COVID times and you compare with 2021, there was very fast growth of LNG import in Central and South America, driven basically by Argentina and Brazil, the largest import, and then we have Chile. And as Pablo mentioned before, Argentina is a 6 months type of demand when you have a very big peak of demand for natural gas, particularly in the power and the residential sectors, which is quite different from the Brazilian market during 6 months, where Brazil, you're going to see later, is more to balance the system, because Brazil is a very hydro-dominated energy matrix. And what's happening is that with this demand growing in 2021 above expectations, prices all over the world, and that impacted also South America and Brazil, going up quite substantially. So last year, at 2020, during COVID times, we're talking about LNG prices so low as $2. Argentina imported LNG at $2.80, $3 per million BTU, Brazil the same. And now we're talking about prices in the range of JKM, as a bit Brazil and Argentina, they kind of balance Europe and Asia because they closer to the America LNG terminals. Therefore, their prices sits in the mid of the two prices. And that's very cheap prices compared to what you see in Brazil. Citygate price, Bolivia gas imported via 3,000 kilometers pipeline. It arrives in Brazil Citygate is at almost $9 per million BTU. And domestic gas arriving in the Brazilian Citygates around $9.50 per million BTU. It's going to increase because, unfortunately, Brazil has also a lot of indexations in the real, that the Brazilian currency also devalued quite a lot. But then the disconnect comes here because most of the LNG in Brazil, and as you're going to see later, is imported to supply power plants to balance the system when you have a drought like we have in this year. And power plants in Brazil that were built in 2003 to 2002, they had 20 years gas supply agreement. We had a big electricity power crisis in 2001, and the government was very fast in asking producers IPPs contracts. And these power plants, they had a long-term 20-year gas supply agreements at $4.50 per million BTUs. And then when you look at the domestic city gate prices and the LNG prices that is direct to this power plant, there is a big disconnect, and that would cause unbalancing terms of suppliers if they have to sell at those prices. And industrial consumers in Brazil, at the gate of the industrial plant, they pay between $14 to $17 per million BTU. That's the latest update of July 2021. And looking at the supply demand in Brazil, Brazil is a big country, 211 million people, but the gas demand in Brazil, the firm gas demand that you can see here in blue, in red, and purple, is very sluggish. It's not growing so fast. And then on top of that, you have the power demand, and that you see in a more detailed way in this chart here. Sometimes Brazil uses very little, like 5 million cubic meters per day on an annual base for power. And as of August, Brazil power sector was consuming 51 million cubic meters per day of natural gas. So from 5 to 51, this is very volatile, very changeable. And it's not like seasonal in terms of Argentina that you have the 6 months from April to August, September. In Brazil, it depends on La Nina, El Nino, and how the reservoirs are going depleted or not. And comparing Brazil and Argentina, Argentina is like 15 million people, Brazil 200 million. Brazil doesn't have the weather, the climate that you have in Argentina, where people have a tradition to heat their homes. There, in Brazil is also a hydropower country. There is so Argentina is almost the double of the consumption of natural gas in Brazil. So Argentina today is the most important gas consumer in South America. And if you see the importations, so Brazil imports gas from basically two sources. We import gas from Bolivia as a long-term contract that started, the supply of Bolivia gas started in 2000 for 20 years, and now it was 30 million cubic meters per day. And now the contract that Petrobras signed after the end of the first contract is for 20 million cubic meters per day. And Bolivia, in terms of supplies, they have the domestic market, they have Argentina, they have Brazil, but you can see that the supply, but Bolivia supply is also going down due to lack of investment in exploration, which causes also a question of how much LNG we're going to need to balance the lack of Bolivian gas from 30 million to 20 million now, and how fast the Bolivian gas is going to be depleted. But in terms of Brazil imports of LNG, we see that from January to August 2021, Brazil imported more or less 5.7 BCM, but we can see the statistic more recently. It's possible that Brazil is going to import almost 12 BCM by the end of the year.
Leda, te nos fuiste.
Pardon?
Ya te escuchamos de nuevo.
Okay, so Brazil is going to import by the end of the year, if the demand grows like that, around that 11 BCM, compared to 20, to be comparable to 2015, when you have a similar situation in terms of depletion of the reservoirs. And domestic gas is mostly reinjected. Brazil produces more than 130 million cubic meters per day of domestic gas. Most of the Brazilian gas is produced in the pre-salt provinces in southeast Brazil, and there are two basins called Santos and Campos, and mostly of the gas is reinjected because it is a very complicated and expensive logistic. Therefore, taking all of this into account, Brazil produces a lot of gas. Brazil has limited now Bolivia supplies. The LNG business is growing fast. So we have now in Brazil 5 terminals in operation and 4 terminals planned in construction. So in operation, we have Northeast Brazil, we have Bahia State, Sergipe State here. We have 2 terminals in Rio de Janeiro State. And just as of the 4th of November, the Brazilian National Petroleum Agency has issued an authorization for a new terminal in Santa Catarina State by New Fortress Energy, coupled to a 30 kilometers connecting pipeline that will connect with Brazil-Bolivia pipeline that runs in this direction. The regas capacity in Brazil also is increasing, so it's expected to reach 61 BCM per annum. And in operation, we have about 30 now, so it's going to double, almost double in a few years' time. So going to have a excess capacity. And Brazil LNG business is FSRU, so all terminals, there's no onshore terminal, all terminals planned and in operation, they all based on FSRU because it's faster, cheaper, and easier to operate. But it causes a problem because when you have FSRUs, you send out regasified gas from the ship to the shore, and then it limits the ability, for example, of Brazil developing new business like we have in Dominican Republic, for example, that has a shore-based terminal that's LNG by truck. because you would have to build a line for liquid LNG to the shore, and then put a truck base, for example, and then distribute LNG by truck to Brazil, because most of the pipelines infrastructure is located near the coast. So Brazil LNG is not base load. I don't see it base load for the time being. And there is a flexible supply to complement hydro generation mostly. And then we see the impact of this year, the drought of this year. So that's a recent statistic from the National Operator System. And you can see the hydro reservoirs year by year basis and how depleted they were. They're recovering a bit now. It went as down in Southeast, that's the most important region in terms of power demand. 16%, now it's been raining a little bit, so it's 18. And you see how the thermal power plants, there are not only gas, you have a lot of gas, but you have biomass, you have a bit of coal, not much, and a bit of fuel oil and diesel, meeting the demands that necessary to cope with this dip in the terms of reservoir capacity. Another phenomenon is that Brazil is now increasing its renewables energy. Wind in Brazil has growing so fast. So now we have in a system that 108,000 megawatts, 108 gigawatt of hydro. We have now 20 gigawatts of wind, and is expected to go faster than that, and to 26 gigawatts by 2025. Wind is growing very fast in Brazil. It's a very good wind regime, particularly in Northeast Brazil, very efficient, very high load factor. And solar is still small, 4 gigawatts, but expected to double to 8 gigawatts by 2025. And gas today, we have about 15 gigawatts, expected to go to 18. So you don't see a lot of new gas-fired power plants in the horizon 2025. And that's what the system is. I did a little bit of a supply-demand balance forecast as well until 2029. And you can see that the supply, the domestic supply of, because of the limitations in reinjection and lack of infrastructure, is not growing very much indeed. But if you look at the capacity, total capacity, including the LNG terminals, there is a huge capacity, idle capacity that can be, if you have a growth in demand, like you see some growth in demand from the liberalization of the market, you can see there is the terminals, if needed, the LNG terminals can meet most of the future demand and still have some idle capacity left. And the new gas market, as I mentioned, the law that was approved this year, enacted this year, with a subsequent decree that regulates the law, has provided lots of new opportunities in Brazil. And I'm going to finalize to talk a little bit to what the new opportunities are. And for the time being, with the new gas law that allows for open access to pipelines, we have now 2 pipelines company connecting Southeast and Northeast Brazil that are private owned. Petrobras has divested the assets, and these pipelines companies, they are working together on a model for entry and exit tariff that will allow connection of the system, and so suppliers from the Southeast can supply in the Northeast and vice versa. Petrobras is also going to divest the Bolivia-Brazil pipeline, so that will create possibly in the near future 3 separate big pipeline companies that will interact with each other. Another business that is growing very fast is the LNG terminal. As you see, we're going to have lots of LNG terminals coming for flexible supply if needed, some industrial. Price is a limitation because this LNG is too expensive, and if you add the regas cost and so on. But we see a lot of movements in Brazil, and we expect the market to face volatility until next year, because there is also the question how long these reservoirs are going to be replenished. So that's my first comments, and looking forward for your questions.
Yeah,